Hi, I'm Chris Leatham. Welcome to The Economy and You. I have a special guest today. Our guest is Earle Pardington. And Earle, you're an attorney. Welcome to Think Tech Hawaii.
Thank you very much.
Nice
it's
to have
a pleasure
you on the
to be here.
Nice to have you on the show. I guess, you know, being an attorney and having worked with the military, you've had dealt with some very interesting issues and some timely issues over the course of your career.
Oh, yes, indeed.
You've dealt with some of the military's issues related to court martials?
Oh, yes. I mean, I've handled just about every kind of case you can imagine. And I think one of the big issues arises in sex assault cases.
That's been a fairly politicized issue the last few years, hasn't it?
That's an understatement. It's become so politicized that commanders are so afraid that if they don't send a case to court-martial, regardless of the evidence, they'll be criticized or their careers will be hurt. And this means that people who can have their careers destroyed, even though they're found not guilty, have to go through this charade.
Now, there's something to be said for this, because this is an issue that also affects the people in the corporate world. If you're an executive in the corporate world, a lot of times now they'll have their meetings open door, like, you know, if there's a woman or vice versa, you know,
Yes,
in the room,
so.
They're afraid to close the door to have a confidential meeting. They feel sort of compelled to leave the door open now so that there's no, you know, possibility of having an accusation made of discrimination or, issues related to a mixed gender environment.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are even afraid to be around children for the same reason. And I'm sorry to say that these issues have become so politically hot.
Yes.
That if people are not careful, they can find themselves in a sticky situation not of their making.
Well, and we've seen these issues before, where the standard of evidence has dissipated from something like clear and convincing or beyond a reasonable doubt down to something like the preponderance of the evidence, which is really based on who's more believable.
Well, it's worse than that. In the military now, there can be no real evidence that anyone would believe, but the commander will send a case to court-martial instead of exercising his discretion and throwing the case out. I mean, it's really bad in the military.
Yeah, but his discretion is, you know, do I protect my career or do I protect the innocent?
Oh, that's right, and they'll sacrifice the innocent virtually every time.
See, that's troubling, because I'm a former Marine. And, you know, there in the Marine Corps, there are men, there are women. Sometimes there are interpersonal relationships within the military, and sometimes they do go awry. And it's not to say that there isn't rape that happens. I mean, it does happen. You know, we've had serious issues in Japan and Okinawa, where these issues have happened, and we know that they did happen. Beyond, you know, where they've gone to trial and there's been evidence that girls have been raped, and I mean, so this has been a problem with the military. What can we do to stem this issue?
Well, I think we have to realize that there are some false allegations.
Yes.
They're relatively small, but if somebody comes in with an allegation and the only evidence is let's say in the case of a woman accusing a man, it can be any number of scenarios, but the typical one, woman accuses a man, but there's evidence from people who were present saying that it didn't happen. Then we need to sensitize commanders in the military and say, look, you're not going to jeopardize your career if you don't send this case to court-martial.
Well, is there a protocol then? I mean, here's the thing. I would think, when I think about somebody being in the military, it's all about protocols and processes. So is there a process, or do we need to define a better process for vetting these cases and have a standardized vetting process? Or do we need to, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if I am a commander and I don't want to send somebody who's been falsely accused and it's just vendetta or somebody trying to get even, or they're trying to sabotage somebody because they don't like them, or they're trying to, you know, create sympathy for themselves. can we set up or standardize a process whereby that doesn't occur?
Well, Congress has enacted recent changes, putting more of the burden on the shoulder of the military lawyer to the commander.
Okay.
But I know I was just reading a case yesterday from the Air Force where two commanders and their staff judge advocate said, no, this case is ridiculous, no evidence. And the Air Force was so paranoid about it, they transferred the individual to a different authority and then brought charges against them, even though two previous commanders and staff judge advocates said no.
So it sounds like to me there's a double jeopardy system in play, because if you were found that there's not evidence, then you should be cleared and allowed to move on with your career.
Well,
But it sounds like that didn't happen.
It's just a determination by a commander and a staff judge advocate. It's not really a trial, but it's a determination that on this evidence you can't possibly convict the accused. And I can't tell you how many of these cases I've won where I didn't know what we were doing at court-martial, and neither did the military judge, or if you had a military jury, they didn't know what we were doing there because the evidence was laughable.
But the scarlet letter still exists.
Oh, yes.
Even if you're found innocent.
If you're found not guilty in a court-martial, it will follow you wherever you go and can destroy your career.
It's not supposed to work that way.
Well, I can give you a good example. Many years ago, I represented a Navy commander who had a condominium here, and he complained against the manager for something the manager had failed to do in his job relating to condominium. Nothing, no big deal for us. And the manager was so piqued at the commander that he called the Navy and accused him of being a homosexual. It was a false allegation. The Navy spent thousands of dollars following this commander around to find out if he was having a homosexual relationship. This was when the military was paranoid about it, and came up with absolutely nothing. And then he was sent to an administrative board to separate him for homosexuality. And when all the evidence was that he wasn't, he was a normal heterosexual male, and this poor guy had to go through this whole board and hearing, have his private life laid all out there. Unfortunately, he had a one-star admiral come and testify for him, and that saved it. But he has the scarlet letter on him for the rest of his career. He'd probably never be promoted to the next grade.
Just because of appearances.
Yeah, just because someone made a false allegation and the command send it to court-martial. I don't want to be, or send it to an administrative board. I don't want to be bothered.
So there's still documents or documentation that still follows that person.
Well, you're supposed to purge it from the record, but the reality is everybody knows about it in the military, which is a fairly closed community.
It's a closed community. It's a small family of people, and so once you get labeled or branded a certain way.
I did a court-martial in Korea where some guy had a girl in his room, and his roommate was in the room the whole time.
That never happens. That never happens.
His roommate was supposedly sleeping, and the roommate was interviewed, and he said, oh, they had the most wonderful time. I tried to ignore them.
Yes.
In bed, and the woman comes out later and says, I was raped. And the airman involved said, what do you mean? We had a wonderful time together. His roommate said they had a wonderful time together. You can't convict somebody on that evidence. Yet the command was so paranoid about this very issue, they sent it to court-martial.
And this was in South Korea.
Yeah, and it was an easy acquittal, but
yes.
My client had to go through all this, had to pay out the money to hire a civilian lawyer like me. And I'm retired Army, so I know a lot about this. But I mean, it's wrong, and the problem is that the women's movement has just made this so politically hot, it's impossible to get a fair hearing.
When you talk about, like, now the legislation, was any of this legislation through VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act?
No, it was a separate act on amending the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Okay.
Which governs all military proceedings. And I fear that there are getting to be too many changes that make it impossible for a commander to say no.
But these are the complexities of having a all-volunteer force made up of men and women both.
Well, I don't think it matters if it's all volunteer or not. You're dealing with humanity.
Yes.
And sadly, there are a certain number of people who will make false allegations of anything. And it's not unusual for women who are embarrassed by what they did. They drank too much, they had sex with somebody they wouldn't have normally had. They feel embarrassed and they feel they have to make a complaint about it.
You know, we used to call that the walk of shame.
Yes, I know. Well, it still is for some of these women, and their answer is to blame the guy.
To blame the guy, yes.
And most of the time, they're telling a essentially true story, but that percentage, which is not true, you know, we all have always said in our law, it's better than 10 guilty go free than 1 innocent be convicted. It's not true in the military.
It doesn't seem to work that way.
No.
It has changed. So, you know, and I know that there is this desire for justice by women who have been raped and wrong, and, you know, or been, you know, where there's been an act of violence against them, and I can respect that desire for justice. They want to be, they want to see the person punished who hurt them, and there needs to be a balance. So it seemed to me, if the scales have tilted to the ridiculous, we need to think about the process and maybe have an independent body who does an evaluation of this, so that it doesn't fall on the commander. Because if it falls on the commander and it falls to a position of you know, where it could reflect on his career because he didn't send somebody to court-martial, you created a catch-22 situation. It looks like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Well, that's exactly because in this Air Force case I read about, there was no doubt the evidence was insufficient to convict. But somebody in the Air Force, high-ranked, was so paranoid that the Air Force was going to get bad publicity from this that they intervened and made sure the case was supposed to go to court-martial. And the military judge, fortunately, was a strong military judge, and he said no. And it was sent back for further proceedings. But this is rare. Too many of your military judges are serving officers. They don't want to anger the, you know, the people with the stars on their shoulder. And it is a serious, serious problem in the military. Perhaps, I know that the recent legislation, they want to put it more in the hands of the lawyers, which I think is a good idea. But the problem is, if it's put in the hands of one lawyer, you get somebody who's really gung-ho.
He's trying to create a name for himself.
Right. It may do it. Perhaps you need to have these cases vetted by panels. I don't know the answer.
It would seem to me that you would want an independent panel that has no necessarily where their rank, if they're military, that their rank or their career, that there's a reflection on their career, irrelevant of the decision that's made by a panel. So in other words, the job of the panel is the job of the panel. It isn't an issue of do they serve this commander or that commander. Their job is just simply to vet it. And perhaps what you have to have is a kind of vetting process to ensure objectivity, that there is a look at the evidence being presented. And I would think that case law would solve some of this.
Well, I would like to see, personally, it'd be nice to have a 3-person panel, civilian, that where a commander has made a choice to send a case to court-martial, that an accused could appeal to review it, who has nothing to do with the military.
Or if even in the other way, I would think would be of value too. So in other words, let's say that the military decided not to prosecute.
Oh, yes.
And then you wanted to send it over and have it for a final review, so that if that gentleman moved to another station or somewhere else, that it didn't get picked up by somebody gung-ho on that new location.
I would agree with that. And I think that we need to do something, because the issue is so politicized that there's no way there is going to be a fair decision made today. The person is 99.999% going to go to court-martial regardless if there's any evidence, because the commander knows if he sends it to court-martial, nobody can accuse him.
Because this is about the commander protecting himself.
That's right.
Over the interests of his troopers. Now, being a Marine, I was raised on, if I'm the higher up guy, if I'm the guy with the rank, my job is to protect my troopers. That's my job.
Yes, but unfortunately, when it comes to sexual assaults, that's out the window.
Okay, that's very interesting. So we need to find a balance. We really do.
I don't know the answer. I mean, there have been various proposals, particularly from women in Congress, and most of them have been very good. But the military is bitterly opposed to any restrictions or giving any civilian body control.
Yes.
They want to keep things the way they are. And there are a few commanders out there who do the right thing, but very few. Very few.
That's unfortunate. Well, we're going to take a break. When we're going to come back, we're going to talk about some of the issues related to Hawaii and Hawaii's family court, and then later on we'll talk a little bit about rail. Okay.
Forever about rail.
Talk about rail. I'm Chris Leatham. This is The Economy and You, and we'll be right back. Aloha.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I want to thank you for watching Think Tech Hawaii. We are delighted to be partners with Think Tech because it gives us the opportunity to bring to you a show every week on Monday at 2:00 p.m. called Ehana Kako. Ehana Kako means let's work together because we believe that Hawaii will be a better place when everybody works together. And in what way? Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we research 3 basic areas and we invite guests to come on board from across the country, the state, and the nation to talk about a better economy, a better government, a better society. Now, aren't those things we all want? Indeed. If you'd like to have the latest research in terms of public policy, as well as ways in which we can build a better government, economy, and society, then tune in every Monday on Think Tech Hawaii at 2:00 p.m. for our fascinating guests on Ehana Kako. Let's work together. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and I'll see you then. Aloha.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Chris Leith, and this is The Economy and You. Today's guest is Earle Pardington. He is an attorney that's been practicing. How long have you been practicing in Hawaii?
47 years.
47 years.
Well, I think
Wow.
40 in Hawaii, 7 in California.
Oh, okay. That's
Approximately.
That's a few years. You've got quite a few billable hours in there.
Yes, I do. Although I hate billable hours.
You hate billable hours. Okay. Well, Earle, I wanted to talk a little bit about family court. We talked about this morning. And one of the challenges with family court is it's supposed to be an open court, right? It's supposed to be a court available for the public to sit in and listen to hearings. And that is actually, in my mind, part of ensuring that a judge is fair and objective in the way he rules on cases.
Well, that's right. Open courtroom is a fundamental concept that goes right back to the American Revolution. But unfortunately, in our family courts, if you want to go over and watch a divorce case that doesn't involve children, which the law says is open to all the public, you're not permitted to go in. And we have a statute that said cases involving children are closed. That's understandable. There are privacy concerns about the children. But there are thousands of divorce cases in which children are not involved at all. But God help you if you try to get in that courtroom.
Well, so here's my question. I'm gonna play devil's advocate on this. Okay, to what end would you want to sit on a case like that? Let's say there's a couple that are going through divorce, and let's say it's a big money case or it's not a big money case. But to what end would we allow other non-interested parties to sit in on a divorce hearing?
Well, I think for the reason you stated, to ensure that justice is being done. I mean, it's important, for example, for somebody who may be doing a study of the family court, trying to determine on whether there's trends or worries, things we have to worry about. People at universities, you have people in media who want to do a story, for example, on, what are the statistics in divorces? How is one side favored over the other, just statistically?
Yes.
Who gets child custody? These are all important things that preserve our democracy.
It's very hard too, by the way. If you go through the records, it takes a little bit of work to figure out who actually is awarded custody. And things that would be of interest to me on this issue, because I've written legislation for over 12 years on reforming the family court system, is are there judges that have certain propensity to give certain lawyers a win?
Well, their judges have a propensity to give a certain side a win, certainly. They're maybe pro-husband or pro-wife. I don't mean in a sense of being kangaroo court, but they just have a natural inclination. And if we're going to see that justice is done in the courts, they have to be open for people to come see that it's being done. And sadly, none of our courts, I might add, really keep meaningful statistics.
No,
For example,
I think they do that intentionally.
Yes.
I think there's an intent not to give us valuable statistical data because it obscures what goes on in the court and makes it much more difficult to criticize what the court does.
Well, that's right, and I can give you an example out of the family court context, but is equally applicable to the family court. Our prosecutor's office does not keep any statistics on the number of cases they lose. All they do is they count all the trials they win and the pleas, which of course are all wins. Put that statistic together and then tell you what a wonderful job they're doing. It's a meaningless statistic.
Yes.
And the same is true in family court. You cannot find out how our prosecutor's office is doing, whether it's in family court juvenile or in a felony criminal court, because there are no statistics compiled.
Yeah, they don't. They won't. And if you try to get them to do it, you're not.
You won't do it because the prosecutor loses such a high percentage of cases if they revealed it. they'd probably be thrown out of office in the next election, but the public doesn't know this.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that there is a big trend. I mean, the vast majority of cases, they try to settle out. They try to get a win.
Oh yeah, well, a vast majority are settled by pleas or plea agreements.
Right.
But trials, plea agreements tell us nothing about our system generally, unless you really go into it in depth. Trials tell us everything about our system. It tells us whether it works, whether we are getting justice, what sentences judges are handing out to these people after a contested trial. This is the essence of our process.
But the big thing about the way the plea process works is that you know, they keep making laws more stringent, more years attached to it. So what happens is you get a bigger gun to point at somebody to take a plea.
Well, that's right. And I remember
I don't think that's right.
when I first came to Hawaii 40 years ago, somebody who was convicted of murder would probably serve maybe 12 to 15 years in prison. I was really surprised how lenient it was then. And now today, you serve 30 or 40 years in prison. And it shows this great shift away from trying to rehabilitate people to locking them up in prison where they get no treatment.
Well, even beyond that, I mean, the cost to the public to keep people incarcerated.
Oh, it's astronomical.
It's astronomical. And the question really is that smart justice? Just throwing people into jail and tossing away the key, you know, people need to be punished for doing bad things, but when you incarcerate people for doing nonviolent crimes for long periods of time, it would seem to me you haven't made society better. You've just taken the certain segment of the population and you've isolated them from the rest of us. But we're paying for it.
Yeah, but even worse than that, well, what you're saying, the worst of that is the cost is enormous. Right now, I have a new client. He's in prison in Saguaro, run by the Corrections Corporation of America. He's schizophrenic. He wants to be alone. They won't let him be alone, so he has to commit misconduct to be thrown in protective custody. When he does his time in protective custody, they put him back in with a cellmate who he attacks in order to get put back into protective custody. And all the prisons do with the mentally ill that are sent to prison, and there are a lot.
There's a lot, yes.
They drug them.
Well, the other problem with that as well is that the people who run these private prisons are the ones advocating for longer prison terms.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm like, well, isn't that a self-serving motivation that you who run the prison, you're supposed to be objective, you're simply supposed to be there to, you know, to ensure that these people serve their time, are actually promoting your own business model by keeping them in prison longer.
And the worst part of it is that they have a financial incentive not to give the mental health treatment that these prisoners need. We need to build a prison facility at the state hospital and send the mentally ill there where they can be treated.
But we've had this problem. This is an ongoing issue.
Oh, it has been. And the answer is they won't spend money, or the answer is let's send them to the mainland where they don't get treated, so they come back out. When my client gets out with his schizophrenia, he's going to be back in prison within 2 years because you can't get treatment. There's no money for mental health treatment, in or out of prison.
No, this is what we've done when I think it was during the Reagan administration that we opened up the mental hospitals around the country and said, let them walk, let them be free. And we stopped allocating funds for mental health treatment. Now, granted, some of those facilities were not good facilities.
Yes.
They did not take care of people the way they should have been taken care of.
But we've learned so much more in the last 30 years.
Yes.
And we now know that our prisons are full of mentally ill people and that they need treatment. And instead of locking them up in prison for long periods of time, they need mental health treatment. But why we won't spend the money and build the facility at the state hospital is just, I mean, it's cruel to these people.
Is it, I think sometimes, I always feel like that the conservatives are sort of seen as the cold-hearted ones and that the liberals are the soft-hearted ones. And you would think a state that was predominantly Democratic, where our legislature is made up of Democrats, that the soft-hearted liberals would be all over this thing.
But it costs money. And the problem is the legislature is under pressure every year to cut the budget, keep the budget within limits. And there's not a lot of sympathy out there in the public for people who are sent to prison for crime. You know, the politicians, particularly right-wing politicians, like, I'm tough on law and order, I'll see these people are put in prison without any regard for
But
the
we're
cause.
seeing those people change their attitude. A lot of those people that had that mindset are now going, wait a minute, we're bankrupting ourselves by incarcerating these people for long periods of time.
There's a story in the Star Advertiser today about the feds, a Justice Department committee coming up with this conclusion. And it's right, but how do we make people understand?
I'm sorry, I got to say this. Duh.
Yeah. I mean, why can't we make people understand if you give people treatment, they're much less likely to recommit crimes and become a problem to society or become homeless on the streets?
Because it's an efficiency component. You know, there's this sort of behavioral model that they use now that we'll bring them in, we'll give them treatment, and we'll fix them in 10 visits or less.
Right, and a lot of mental health issues are lifetime mental health issues.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
like alcoholism. You're an alcoholic for life, rather.
Yes.
And you need to understand that with mental health, but they don't.
Well, aren't we supposed to screen for mental health issues when people are incarcerated and or when they go before a judge? I mean, isn't there a screening process for these folks?
No, not really. When they go to the prison, they're supposed to screen them, but they have no money to treat these people. So they send them off to Saguaro Correctional Facility in Arizona where
So out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind. They have one psychiatrist there who comes in once a week, and all he does is give people drugs to keep them drugged. Not treat them, mind you. They just
Right.
drug them into a numb state and keep them that way for their time in prison. And guess what happens the day they're released? They go off the drugs.
They're off the drugs and back to being a schizophrenic again.
Right.
This is sad.
Yeah, I know. And we got a little off our topic on family court, but it's related to me in a sense,
Well-
because you have the same problem with juveniles in family court.
Well, you do, and you know we have I've been an advocate for one of my big advocacies has been to move away from the adversarial model in family court child custody litigation, and because it creates so much ill will and ongoing tension between parents after the divorce because of the nastiness of a custody litigation. You no longer have a collaborative opportunity. What you have is ill will, adversarial, and it just goes on. And all you hear year on and year after these parents is how bad this first parent was and how bad that parent was and how they just hate on each other.
And there's this enormous incentive to lie.
There's a huge incentive because it's all about winning.
That's right. You accuse the other parent of the most horrendous
Well,
things.
let's see how far we can throw them under the bus.
That's exactly.
And that needs to change. And the family court needs to engage in a collaborative model that respects the unique and important role that both parents play. There is no such thing as a perfect parent.
Yes.
It doesn't
I agree.
exist. We're all learning as we go when it comes to parenting.
I can give you another example within the family court and the district courts. We have these TROs. You can get temporary restraining orders against people.
Oh, that process never gets abused.
Oh, that is so abused. I would think probably 60% of all TROs that I've seen given are completely not warranted. And the judges are so afraid that if they don't grant a TRO, they're going to be criticized.
Just like commanders,
Exactly.
same problem.
I had one recently in which on the face of the application, it didn't comply with the law and a district judge signed it.
Yes. Well, and one of the challenges too is family court and district court have different standards of evidence.
Yes.
If it's a non-family related TRO, the standard is clear and convincing evidence, but where it's in family court, it's based on the preponderance of the evidence. So there's a real lack of consistency in the law.
It's lunacy. That's
Yes.
the only way I can describe it.
Yes, so one of the things I think what would be helpful here is to have a standard of clear and convincing evidence and utilize that and then do a proper vetting of these cases.
Here's where we need no TRO should be issued without a 3-judge panel reviewing
And
it.
here's the other thing. If you're going to issue an ex parte TRO, issue it on both parties. So there's no benefit in gaming the system.
Yes.
Put it on both parties. It just applies to both parties. No harm, no foul. You go your separate ways. And I don't use it as a tool to gain an advantage in child custody litigation or so that I could kick out a roommate who I don't like.
I couldn't agree more.
Yes.
I mean, I can tell you that after being a criminal lawyer for 47 years, I have seen so much perjury in criminal cases, and a lot of it police perjury, I'm sorry to say. But when it comes to family court makes the criminal courts look like small change.
Yes,
The
yes.
amount of perjury in family court just defies belief. Any system would be better than the one we have now.
Well, I think, I've been writing legislation to try and make improvements, but sometimes it feels like I'm plugging my fingers in the dam.
I spent, I forget how many years going to the legislature in drunk driving cases, trying to get them to change the law. And I discovered that when they heard I was a defense lawyer, they wouldn't listen to me. Mothers Against Drunk Driving wasn't even listening to me. And of course, it's the defense lawyers who know what's wrong with the law. And it's never occurred to anybody that we defense lawyers would like to have strong laws too to protect us from drunk drivers.
Right.
And we go in there and tell them something, and our prosecutor traditionally, you'll love this, if the suggestion doesn't come from our prosecutor's office, they will oppose it no matter how beneficial it may be to the public.
Well, let's end on that note, because I want to come back and talk about rail. So we're going to take
Happy
a commercial
to.
break, and we'll be right back. I'm Chris Leatham. This is The Economy and You. My guest today is Mr. Earle Pardington, and stay tuned. We're going to talk about rail. Aloha.
Okay, this is Think Tech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5
Aloha.
p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Hi, welcome back, folks. My name is Chris Leatham. This is The Economy and You, and today's guest is Earle Pardington. Earle, we've been talking about the family court. We've been talking about issues with the military court, but let's talk a little bit about rail. I know this is an issue you get pretty passionate about.
Well, I represented Stop Rail Now in the original lawsuit, I don't know, nearly a decade ago, to Stop Rail. And our complaint then was that the facts and figures were false. It wasn't going to cost the low amount that they said. It wasn't going to have the ridership they said. And today you saw in the paper now that property taxes are going to have to go up, once rail gets started, 9%. I think that's cloud cuckoo land thinking. I think property owners are going to see rates 20, 25%, or even more going up.
That seems like a very worst case scenario, though.
Well, it is, because the rail project was not well thought out. It was.
But we argued over this thing for 25 years. We argued about the rail.
Well, yes, but the problem is that you had the politicians, the construction unions, and the contractors all getting together and deciding they wanted it, and then selling a bag of tricks or lies to the public. For example, the rail goes only to Kapolei, it doesn't go to Wahiawa, Mililani, and here we are building a new 10,000 unit housing project that's just going to be EVA of the H2, that people are going to have no access
Now,
to rail.
where is this at? Where's this housing project
Oh,
going to be?
I forget the name of it. It's been in the paper recently. It's just off, as you go up the H2, it's just off to the left before
Okay.
you get to Mililani in the now agricultural fields.
Okay.
This was recently approved.
Well, and Haseko is also building out in Kapolei, the Kapolei area. They have a
Right.
large development.
But the problem we have is that Kapolei was supposed to be built as a self-contained unit. People would live and work in Kapolei. Why are we building the rail to bring people from Kapolei? Well, Kapolei is supposed to be the place people stay and work, and we're not bringing the people from Mililani or Wahiawa or Kailua or what have you.
Now, is that, but there's also the conversation of building more housing along the railroad so people don't have to go in their cars, so that they can just live in higher density populated housing areas and then jump on the rail and come in and out of Honolulu.
Well, that's what they're selling people. Out in the Eva Plain, we're going to pave it all with housing. Unfortunately, when the rail gets started, there's not going to be any housing there. And the problem's going to be they're not going to have the ridership. That's going to increase the property tax. And even worse, the California experience, California discovered that if you don't put parking places by heavy rail projects like this, like the Bay Area Rail Transit BART,
Right?
people won't come. People will not take buses and then transfer to rail.
But
They
we're
ju-
Hawaii. What, they just ride their bicycle or?
Well,
take
some
their
will, but
moped?
if you live out in Waianae, people are not going to ride their bicycle from Waianae or Makaha down to Kapolei to get on the rail. Are they going to take the bus? Well, the California experience says no. It's one thing if they were building parking structures next to these stations so people could drive and park.
But if I were an entrepreneur and I had the kind of money available or was able to get together a hui of money, I want to build that parking structure as a private entrepreneur, because then I can just gouge the public for parking.
Of course, if I had $1 million to invest, that's exactly what I would invest it in, because that's what people will want. But nobody is looking that far ahead. You know, they only look this far ahead. That's it. If something's going to happen after their term is over, they don't care. And the problem with our city council is everybody knew rail, the cost of rail was going to explode. Everybody knew that the ridership projections were not realistic, but nobody has answered the question, how are we going to pay for it? We should have adopted light rail, that is streetcar kinds of trains. And I don't mean on the streets. I mean, you can put streetcars on dedicated routes. The San Diego to Tijuana streetcar is a good example of that. And also in the peninsula in San Francisco, they have put light rail going up
That's
a
true.
part of the peninsula.
That's true.
And this is cheaper. You can put rail in more places for the amount of money. We could convert to light rail, but they're not going to do it because the unions, the contractors, and the politicians are all in this little conspiracy. to
Which
make
always
sure.
sort of baffles me in a way, because when I think of business, I'm always thinking, well, this is where the Republicans, this is their kuleana when it comes to big business, and you know, and colluding with big business to, you know, pass laws that either provide tax benefits for corporations and things like that. But in Hawaii, it seems like business and the unions are sort of walking lockstep with the politicians.
Well, they are, because we're a one-party state, so you have to. And besides, money corrupts. And if you tell the politicians, I'll give you $100,000, and you know what I expect, what's a politician going to do? Say no? They'd have to be crazy to say no, because if you don't have money, they can't get reelected. So we have a system that invites this kind of corruption. It is corruption. Let's not pretend. It's corruption.
Yeah, well, we need to have, well, one of the reasons I have argued for having a stronger Republican Party isn't necessarily that I think one is better than the other, but simply because then we have that sort of that debate, and they have a challenge of different challenging, you know, ideas or opinions, and that competition of ideas is what makes a democracy strong.
That's right. I agree with you. I agree with you completely. And because we're a one-party state, there's no incentive to address it that way. The only way we can deal with the political donations that cause all the problem is by passing, in my view, a constitutional amendment requiring that the source of every donation, direct or indirect, to any politician must be filed with the state
But
when it's made.
okay, but don't we do that now?
Well, there's still ways of getting around it. You know, people can give money to somebody and they don't know unless somebody gives it. There's no strict recording requirement built into our state constitution.
But I can tell you, one of the things I can tell you too, knowing first, having ran for the Senate, is that the software that we use to enter in this information is really kludgy. It's hard to use.
Oh, yes, but
I would say one of the things we need to do is build a better software package for posting this information, because it's really, being a software developer, I know what well-written software looks like, and this software has a lot to be desired for.
how many months go by before we have another revelation that all this money has been spent on a computer project and it doesn't work? Today's paper gave us an example that the Department of Education paid substitute teachers twice last year, and it took them a year to figure it out. And out of the substitute teachers here, only 3 were honest enough to come forward and say, why am I getting a second check? I mean, you can't write software that guarantees a check goes out once. This place is unbelievable when it comes to computers.
Well, you know, one of the problems here, I can speak to this firsthand, is we have multiple data centers that don't talk to each other. We really need to have a consolidated data center that has the ability to hold data. We've got redundant data all over the place. These systems do not talk to each other or update their systems by and large. There may be a few that do, but by and large, these systems do not communicate with each other. And they're written on different platforms, and there is no overseeing of this by an independent body to make sure that we've got an efficient system, because there are all these little minions that exist.
And the classic example of rail, try to find out the exact costs
Yeah,
for rail.
right.
Forget it. Still haven't figured
Because
out.
they're subcontractors, and this company eats up this company, who gets a
That's right.
contract, and then they subcontract to the other guy. And then they feed it off to other people.
I still haven't figured out how rail is going to get from Kalihi downtown yet. I still haven't figured out that route. I know it's going to go along Dillingham somewhere, and somehow it's supposed to jump over to Nimitz Highway, but nobody's shown me the exact route.
Well, it seemed to me it's going to have to cut through maybe a part of Fort Shafter or something, because that's the only place I can see that you've got enough space.
No, past Fort Shafter. I mean, what I'm saying from where the Kalihi Transit Center is now, near the airport viaduct.
Okay.
From that to Ala Moana, it's supposed to go down Dillingham initially on the Mackay side of Dillingham, and somewhere it's supposed to skip over to Nimitz. I don't know where that is, and nobody can show me where that is.
Maybe it hasn't been determined yet.
Well, shouldn't we know? We're building it.
Somebody eventually will tell us. We'll know when they put the pylons in. That's kind of how you'll see it when the pylons come in.
Well, and there was that problem. It's supposed to pass to where the blood bank of Hawaii is in Dillingham. They bought the property past the blood bank
Right.
as you come into town. That some of it's all been bought and cleared.
Yes.
And then I heard somebody say, well, the blood bank objected and they don't want to move. Well, if they don't move, the property that's been bought for the rail can't be used.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting situation, isn't it? I mean, maybe you have to learn to build around or underneath or something like that. Who knows?
Well, that costs more money.
It costs more money. Yes. I would like to close today, Earl. We lost one of our senators,
Yes.
Gil Kahele, quiet senator from the Big Island. And I'd like to just acknowledge his loss. He served the community well. He was a fine example of a man with character, and served with dignity, and always had his door open to anybody that wanted to come in and chat with him. And I know he'll be missed by the folks from the Big Island and his family.
Well, he was really the kind of legislator we need. He was a good man, and it makes you realize, particularly as I'm older than he is, that, there's a limit to life. And the accomplishments people make in their life are important. And
Yes.
he really contributed a lot to the state.
He did. He contributed a lot, and I'd like to say to Gil, aloha and hui ho. Yeah, until we meet again. Thank you, Earle, for being on the show today. It was nice to having you here on Think Tech.
Happy to be here.
And we'll see you all next week. I'm Chris Leatham, and this is The Economy and You. Aloha.
Hi everybody, I'm IC Davidson. Thanks for watching Think Tech Hawaii. One of the things that we try to do here is promote civic engagement. How do we do that? We put on shows weekdays from 12 to 5 p.m. We let people in our world on Facebook and all the social media. Today I'd like to talk to you about another way that you can engage us here at Think Tech Hawaii and help us promote civic engagement here in Hawaii. What you do is you get on Twitter, you follow us at ThinkTechHI, and during the day, between weekdays between 12 and 5 p.m., you can interact with each of our live shows. What does that mean? You can send us questions, comments, thoughts, experiences, anything. All you have to do is mention us on Twitter. We'll see it here in the studio, and our hosts and guests will address them accordingly. This is a big thing for us. We want to hear from you. The conversation doesn't start here when our show ends. It ends when everybody gets their say. Join us weekdays, 12 to 5 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com. Join in the conversations live with Twitter, at ThinkTechHI. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your support. See you soon.